Hi, welcome to Starz Recapped. Today I'm going to explain an English-language French thriller action movie called Dogman, which was released in the year 2023, directed by Luc Besson. Spoilers ahead. Watch out and take care. It's a tempestuous night in New Jersey, and the police are patrolling the road outside the city, searching for a fugitive. They pull over a speeding truck, and an officer approaches the driver to request identification, which the driver lacks. Meanwhile, the other officers inspect the back of the truck and are stunned to discover a large number of dogs. Moments later, psychiatrist Evelyn arrives at the police station to assess the driver and determine whether he should go to prison or a mental institution. Upon entering the cell, she finds the driver sitting in a wheelchair and notices a fresh injury. As the person turns around, Evelyn realizes he is a drag queen named Doug, who reveals that the dogs in the truck were his children. Evelyn persuades him to share his story. Doug was raised in a strict rural religious family. His father, Mike, bred dogs for fighting and would even starve them for days before each match to make them more ferocious. Mike also found any excuse to beat his wife and Doug, especially if they tried to feed the dogs. However, he had a soft spot for his eldest son, Richie, because he took after him. The dogs were vicious in the fights, but they adored Doug, who would lie beside their cage, speaking to them and stroking them, sometimes sneaking food for them. Unfortunately, one day Richie caught him in the act and informed Mike, who confronted Doug at lunch. Doug confessed he preferred the company of dogs over his own family, which enraged Mike. In a fit of fury, Mike dragged him outside and threw him into the cage with the dogs, who immediately approached him, snuggling and soothing him. From that moment on, Doug lived in the cage, even through the harsh winter, surviving on whatever scraps his father tossed his way. One day, his mother secretly brought him some canned food, instructing him to bury them for safekeeping, then revealed she was running away because she was pregnant and wanted to give the baby a better life. Doug tells Evelyn he holds no resentment toward her for leaving. Sometime later, Richie placed a sign on the cage reading, "In the name of God," blaming Doug for their mother's departure. However, Doug smiled upon seeing the sign in reverse, realizing that God spelled dog. After Evelyn leaves for the night, a flashback reveals what transpired before Doug's arrest. A man named Juan entered an abandoned college building and encountered a Doberman guarding the hallway. He asked for the Dogman, and a door opened, leading to Doug's hidden quarters, surprisingly well furnished despite the building's dilapidated condition. It was Juan who had installed all the cameras months earlier. Now, he was delivering a puppy found by Martha, an elderly woman who managed the local laundromat and did Doug's laundry. Juan explained that a feared gangster known as the Executioner had been extorting local businesses every week. Since Martha could no longer afford to pay, she had been forced to sell cherished family heirlooms. Doug reassured Juan that he would take care of the problem. Later, Doug disguised himself as a widow and positioned himself near the club where the gangsters congregated. He sent a small dog inside carrying a phone in its mouth, which it delivered to the Executioner just as it started ringing. As the gangster answered, a larger dog entered and clamped its jaws onto the Executioner's groin, making him scream in agony. Doug warned him not to move, or the dog would inflict irreversible damage. Then, he demanded that the Executioner leave Martha alone, or the dog would enjoy a meal full of nuts. The Executioner hastily agreed, but as soon as the dogs dashed out of the bar, he ordered his men to pursue them. In the present, morning arrives, and Evelyn visits Doug's home while the police gather evidence. The place is covered in bodies and blood, with bullet holes scattered throughout. After collecting a few items, Evelyn returns to the station, where Doug has already cleaned up and changed. Grateful for her bringing his belongings, he continues his story. As a child, Doug was forced to live in the cage for months, receiving his education from magazines hidden behind a wooden plank, likely left there by his mother. One day, one of the dogs became pregnant, and Doug secretly hid the puppies to keep them safe from his family. Unfortunately, Richie spotted him again and informed their father, who stormed outside, armed and ready to deal with the puppies. Doug immediately clung to the cage door, shouting at Mike while the dogs barked and growled alongside him. Infuriated, Mike fired his gun through the cage, causing Doug to collapse. The bullet struck his hand, severing a finger, then ricocheted and lodged into Doug's spine. Fearing the situation could turn deadly, Richie pulled Mike back inside, but not before dropping a handkerchief for Doug. Barely able to move, Doug wrapped the cloth around his bleeding hand and placed his severed finger inside a small bag. Then he grabbed a magazine and showed his dog a picture of a police car while handing it the bag containing the finger, instructing the dog to escape through the hole left by the gunshot and locate the officers. The dog dashed off with the bag in its mouth, crossing the town until it spotted a police vehicle, where it sat patiently until the officers noticed it. Before long, a group of policemen surrounded Doug's house and burst in, discovering the poor boy trapped in the cage while Richie clung to Mike in terror. An ambulance swiftly transported Doug away, but the doctor chose not to extract the bullet. In the present, Doug explains to Evelyn that with his leg braces, he can walk a little, just enough to do simple tasks like getting into bed. He can also stand, but only for a few moments. The doctors avoided removing the bullet because tampering with that area might leave him permanently paralyzed, a risk he faces every time he gets to his feet. Mike was sentenced to 20 years, but he took his own life after just 2 weeks. Richie received a 12-year sentence but was released after 8 for good behavior. On the day of his release, a few dogs were waiting outside the prison gates and began following him. As Richie strolled through town, more and more dogs joined the group until he finally became aware of them. Panicked, he attempted to flee down an alley, but the dogs pounced on him and tore him apart. Once Doug was discharged from the hospital, he was sent to an orphanage, but he struggled to form friendships. While the other children spent their time playing outdoors, he remained in his wheelchair inside the library, reading extensively. The only person who befriended him was Salma, Doug's first and only love. She was a young woman who worked at the orphanage and adored Shakespeare. Upon learning of Doug's love for reading, she introduced him to her favorite books and even encouraged him to participate in small theatrical performances for the other children. Most of their props were inexpensive or handmade, but they poured their hearts into their acting, which made the other kids love their plays. Doug had a great time dressing up and found immense joy in Salma teaching him how to apply makeup, explaining that it allowed him to become anyone he wanted. Salma was intelligent, imaginative, and had a distinct perspective on life, which quickly made Doug fall for her. Unfortunately, one day she left the orphanage to pursue a career in acting, and in the years that followed, Doug collected every newspaper article about her performances, carefully pasting them into a scrapbook. As Doug grew older, he attended college through online courses, eventually earning a bachelor's degree in biological sciences before securing a job at a dog shelter. When Salma finally made it to Broadway, Doug attended her play and attempted to approach the stage, but the crowd was standing, preventing him from reaching it. Fortunately, he was granted backstage access, where Salma immediately recognized him. She was thrilled to see him and deeply appreciated the flowers he brought, but she became even more excited when he presented her with the scrapbook. Salma was so touched that she thanked him with a kiss, raising his hopes. Doug was just about to confess his feelings when the director suddenly entered and complimented the scrapbook as well. Doug was crushed upon discovering that Salma was married to the director and that they were already expecting a child. Devastated, Doug congratulated them and returned to the shelter, where he forced himself to stand so he could shout and pound on the cages to release his frustration. The dogs barked at him, and when he collapsed to the floor, one dog struggled with the latch until it successfully opened the cage, allowing all the dogs to rush out and cuddle Doug in an attempt to console him. After that, Doug cut his hair as a symbolic act of moving on. Sometime later, 2 government officials arrived to inform him that the shelter was being shut down under the pretense of budget cuts. Doug pointed out that funding had been reduced every year since he started working there, yet he had kept the shelter running through donations, with the only municipal support being the building itself. Caught off guard, the men admitted that the property was being sold to a developer for financial gain. Doug was given until Monday to vacate, and the dogs were supposed to be relocated to other shelters. However, when Monday arrived, authorities found the building completely abandoned. Doug had disappeared along with the dogs. That was when he relocated to the deserted college building, where he spent his days reading to his beloved canine companions. He soon began searching for a job, but every place turned him down due to his wheelchair. One afternoon, Doug visited a club that was hiring a bartender and arrived just in time to witness the drag queens rehearsal, instantly becoming captivated by their costumes and artistry. The owner informed Doug that the bar position had already been filled, but Doug boldly stated that he wanted to perform instead, sharing his background. The man remarked that people wouldn't be interested in a performance done from a wheelchair, so Doug got out of it and explained that he could remain standing for an entire song. The queens were highly impressed and found him adorable, convincing the owner to give Doug a shot. The following Friday, the queens helped Douglas pick out an outfit, apply makeup, and get a wig for his performance. Wanting to leave a strong first impression, he removed his leg braces and asked his new friends to be ready to catch him when he was finished. The queens assisted him onto the stage, and he waited behind the curtains, which opened as he was introduced as Edith Piaf. Doug began singing in French, making delicate hand gestures, and both the audience and his colleagues were mesmerized by his voice. Everyone could feel the raw emotion in the lyrics, and by the time he finished, the entire crowd erupted in applause and cheers, demanding more. As the curtains closed, the other queens hurried to catch Doug just before he collapsed. From that point on, Doug was invited to perform at the club every Friday night. Of course, this wasn't enough to make a living, so Doug launched a service that paired lonely individuals with the perfect dog for companionship and protection. He also provided additional assistance if needed, implying involvement in illicit activities similar to his work with the executioner. One day, while cooking, his dogs fetched him every ingredient he needed from the pantry, which sparked an idea, what he called the fair redistribution of wealth. His smallest dog would sneak into wealthy homes through open windows or ceiling vents left unlocked due to its tiny size. Then it would unlock a larger entryway so the rest of the dogs could enter. Together, they would steal as much jewelry as they could carry, and no one ever suspected animals were behind the crimes. Everything went smoothly for a while until a wealthy woman contacted insurance agent Ackerman, who suspected her of attempting insurance fraud. She insisted that every door and window had been locked except for a small bathroom window, and her dogs hadn't barked. However, she provided security footage, and as Ackerman reviewed it, he spotted a dog running away with something in its mouth. It seemed unbelievable, but then he recalled other unexplained cases in recent months and checked additional recordings. To his astonishment, the same dogs appeared repeatedly on camera, previously dismissed by other agents as stray animals. In one specific video, Ackerman noticed a man pretending to be a security guard waiting for the dogs with a truck. He traced the vehicle's license plate and uncovered Doug's identity, eventually learning that he worked at the club. One Friday night, Ackerman attended Doug's performance, and to his shock, he noticed Doug wearing one of the stolen necklaces. After the show, Ackerman approached the dressing room with a flower, pretending to be a fan. He invited Doug to dinner, but Doug declined, saying he had to get home to feed his kids. As Doug left the club, Ackerman discreetly tailed him. Upon entering the old building with a gun, the dogs alerted Doug, who immediately commanded them to hide. Ackerman encountered a Doberman guarding the hallway and contemplated shooting, but just then, Doug opened the door and told him the stolen jewelry was inside a safe. Once Ackerman had the box, he sat down to inspect its contents, giving Doug the opportunity to signal his dogs to eliminate him. With most of his past now revealed, Doug explains how he was ultimately arrested. The evening after Doug assisted Martha, the executioner and his gang tracked down the abandoned building by torturing Juan until he gave up the location. Once they confirmed they were at the right place, they executed Juan with a gunshot. The noise alerted Doug to their presence, and he instructed his dogs to take battle positions while he grabbed a weapon from his arsenal. The executioner ignored the Doberman and began firing at the metal door to no effect, while Doug slipped away through a concealed narrow passage. Just then, a small dog scurried through the corridor, luring the gangster into a hole, where larger dogs immediately dragged him in and tore him apart. The gang then split up, pursuing different dogs that kept peeking into the corridor. One man chased a dog into a bathroom with a wet floor, and as soon as he stepped inside, the dog released a cable, electrocuting him. Another gangster followed a chihuahua into a locker room, only for Doug to shoot him through the wall once he got close enough. One man entered the wrong room and found himself surrounded by massive dogs that wasted no time attacking him. While chasing a small dog, another gangster fell into a hidden pit, and when his companion attempted to pull him out, the dog shoved him in as well. Doug arrived and shot them both. In the corridor, one gangster triggered a trap and ended up dangling from the ceiling, making him an easy target for a dog to take down. Nearby, another thug also walked into a trap and was mauled. The executioner, growing anxious, ordered his men to bring him a stronger weapon. At that moment, Doug fired through the wall, taking down several gang members. When the executioner returned fire, a bullet grazed Doug's back before he managed to take cover. A wounded Doug dragged himself across the floor, retreating through the narrow passage back to his quarters while the executioner used the powerful weapon to finally breach the door. He stormed inside and aimed at Doug, only to discover he was out of ammunition, giving the dogs the perfect opportunity to finish him off. Afterward, Doug and his dogs fled in a truck, which was when the police apprehended them. While Doug sat inside the police car, he gave his dogs a signal, prompting them to scatter and escape. In the present, Evelyn tells Doug she's heard enough and leaves. Doug smokes by the window, smiling when he hears a distant howl. His dog had been waiting outside, and at the sound of the howl, all the other dogs gathered in the area. As Doug changed into the outfit Evelyn brought him, the dogs infiltrated the station, scaring the front guard into fainting. A slender dog snatched the keys and squeezed through the bars, dropping them near Doug's cell door. Doug unlocked the door and left his wheelchair behind, determined to walk to the church across the street. There, he asked God to pass judgment on him before collapsing to the ground, taking his final breath. Soon, all his dogs surrounded him, and every dog in town arrived to pay their respects. Meanwhile, the Doberman made its way to Evelyn's house to protect her from her abusive ex-husband. That's my explanation for the movie, Dogman. So, what do you guys think about the movie? Write in the comment, turn on the notification and leave a like to help the channel out. Thank you for watching.